I pop my peas real hard. Like I pop them.
They're percussive popping peas.
Peter Pickle Poppered. What's that thing? Peter Popper pickled a pickled onion? No. Peter Parker.
Peter
Piper picked a Peter Piper. Peter Piper picked a pickled pepper.
Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. A peck of pickled peppers Peter Piper picked. If Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, where's the peck of pickled peppers Peter Piper picked?
Okay, now let me try this. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. A peck of pickled peppers Peter Piper picked. If Peppa Pepper picked a pickled peppers.
Peppa Pig?
Peppa Pig. That's how I did.
Mm-hmm. Which is about how I expected you to do, if I'm being honest.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Ride Home Podcast. My name is Abby.
Hey guys, it's Caitlin.
We are very excited to be celebrating Halloween with you by doing a throwback horror movie episode. And it was really hard to pick this episode because there are very few truly classic horror movies that I haven't shown Caitlin yet. Mm-hmm. And I wanted it to be something that she has not seen. Mm-hmm. And when I thought of what probably the most famous horror movie that Caitlin has not seen, I know for a fact that it is A Nightmare on Elm Street. Mm-hmm. So I introduced her to that last night, and we are now recording from the comfort of our own home. Mm-hmm. Before we do the review of it, two little things. The first thing is, if you have not seen this movie and plan to, we will be discussing it in its entirety, so there will be spoilers. And then I just wanted to give a quick summary before we jumped in. In Wes Craven's classic slasher film, several Midwestern teenagers fall prey to Freddy Krueger, a disfigured midnight mangler who preys on the teenagers in their dreams, which in turn kills them in reality. After investigating the phenomenon, Nancy begins to suspect that a dark secret kept by her and her friend's parents may be the key to unraveling the mystery. But can Nancy and her boyfriend Glenn solve the puzzle before it's too late? First of all, I do know that this movie is supposed to take place in Ohio. There is a very funny aspect to that because there is a scene. Do you know the bridge scene where Glenn, aka Johnny Depp, is eating a hamburger? Mm-hmm. There's a giant palm tree behind them. It is very clearly Southern California.
Not Ohio. Yeah.
Nothing about this
nothing
movie
about
is
this
Ohio.
says it's the Midwest.
No. There's absolutely nothing about this movie that feels Midwest, looks Midwest. And I truly forgot that it was set in Ohio until I just read that. Uh-huh. I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah, that's weird.
So this movie was obviously directed by Wes Craven, who, this wasn't his first movie, but it was probably his biggest out of his originals. Mm. And then obviously a lot of people know him as the director of Scream.
Sure. We
both love Scream. Mm-hmm. And so you would think Wes Craven Scream, that it would just be an instantaneous, like, you love A Nightmare on Elm Street. Mm-hmm. However, when I saw this movie in my early 20s, I was very new to horror, and I was just kind of learning. A shout out to my friend Troy from college. He basically introduced me to horror, and he was showing me all of like the horror essentials. And it was just like every movie I loved. It was just like Rosemary's Baby, I loved it. Halloween, I loved it. Friday the 13th, I loved it. And then we got to this movie. And I just remember almost not taking it seriously. Like I just was like, what on earth is this? It really left a horrible taste in my mouth to the point that I have only seen it once, maybe twice, because I just like refused. I just absolutely hated the idea of even like revisiting it. And then this year, obviously, when I was trying to think of something to show you, I was like, you know what, it might be interesting to see if my opinions have changed, because I'm 32 now and it's been probably 10 years since I've seen it. And I was super curious to figure out where I stand now. So before we get into how I feel about rewatching it after all this time, what are your initial thoughts?
So I'm like 50-50 on this one.
Okay.
There were parts of it that I thought were absolutely ridiculous, like kind of how you felt the first time you watched it. But then there were parts of it that I also really enjoyed and appreciated. And at the end of the day, it's really hard not to compare it to Scream because it's just not Scream.
Right.
Like, it just isn't.
No.
And like, I don't think I'll ever like this movie as much as I like Scream.
It definitely, because it is Wes Craven and you're thinking about, you know, Scream and you're going into it with that attitude. I completely agree that Scream blows us away. I mean, he really developed into a much better storyteller, writer, director, everything in that time. Just technical developments alone and like film obviously sets Scream apart.
Right.
But removing that, if you made Scream at the same time as A Nightmare on Elm Street with the same script from Scream, I still think Scream is a better movie.
Yeah, I agree.
I will say I did not hate it as much this time.
Okay.
And I was pleasantly surprised that I was able to immerse myself into the story enough that there were some parts that were genuinely creepy. And I was like, ooh, like that was actually really cool. And especially for being made in the mid 80s, I was like, wow, that's really like they did a great job with that. Do I think though that this belongs in like the conversation of greatest horror movies of all time? I still don't think it does. I mean, Rotten Tomatoes, 95%. I mean, people love this movie. There is a lot of really interesting and original concepts in this movie that sets it very much apart from like a typical slasher. However, the rest of it is so sloppy that you can't just overlook how sloppy the rest of it is just because it's a very original killer and like mode of killing.
And that's my kind of issue with it. Because at its core, the main concept of the movie is really cool.
Yeah.
Incredible concept.
Like he had a great idea when he came up.
Like the fact that this creepy ass dude with knives for fingers only exists when you fall asleep at night.
Right.
But somehow actually kills you in real life. Like he only exists in your nightmares, but he somehow is able to kill you in real life.
Yeah.
Insane. I'm obsessed with that concept for a movie. But it's just like you said, the execution of that concept and all of the other stuff around that main point of the movie is so sloppy.
Yeah. There are some really special moments throughout. I made a note of like the scenes that really grabbed me during this time around.
Me too.
I shit on it so much when I was in my early 20s that I didn't like appreciate the good scenes. But when Nancy is asleep in the bed and he comes down, like pushes down through the ceiling and is kind of like pushing through the drywall.
Yes.
Truly like terrifying to look at. And then we also have the claw coming up through the bathtub when Nancy is taking a bath.
Yeah, that's a cool shot.
It's a very cool shot. The thing that this movie does the best is that like lead up, like the build up.
I was gonna say like the creep factor. And like kind of just giving you that unsettled kind of creepy feeling is honestly, I think, better than the kills themselves.
I actually completely agree with you. I think that one of my issues currently, and was one of my issues when I first saw this movie, is that I don't necessarily find Freddy Krueger scary.
Literally, one of my notes is, why is Freddy a little bit funny?
Right. Which in later movies, they lean into that. They like make him more of like a scary clown almost, like, but just without like being painted up as a clown. Like they do play into his humor a little bit more. But I think what's off-putting about him in this movie is that, again, you have these really amazing shots where it's truly terrifying. Right after Johnny Depp's character Glenn dies, where like the blood is pouring everywhere, and it kind of reminds me of like The Shining when the blood's like pouring out of the elevators. And so like you have these really like iconic moments and these beautiful shots that are truly scary. And then in the next scene you have Freddy Krueger, like his little arms jutting out, you know, when his arms grow.
Yeah.
And just the way he talks is also inconsistent through it. It's like sometimes he's this deep creepy voice, and then other times he's like, hey. Yeah.
He like pops out the one time and I'm like, what?
And I think the second Freddy is on screen, I feel like I'm immediately pulled out of the story. I almost feel like this movie would be scarier if you never actually saw the killer.
Oh, yeah.
Like you see the face leaning in, you see the claw coming out. But if you never actually put a face to it, I honestly think it would have been scary. Obviously, you wouldn't have had a multi-movie franchise.
Sure.
But I think Freddy is my issue.
I kind of see that because, like you said, it does kind of detract from the scary elements. Because in my mind, like you were just describing, like all of those scenes that you said where it's like he's poking through the ceiling and he's like the claws like coming up between her legs in the bathtub and like these really like horrifying things that are happening. And then like when it cuts back to reality, or even in their nightmares, they're literally just like rolling around on the ground, like tackling Freddy and he's tackling them. And I'm like, what? Like every time someone dies, that happens. And I'm just like the like rolling around on the ground, like wrestling, tackling scenes were very not matching
the rest of
the tone. I think that is the issue. Like if they just showed it like what was happening in real life and didn't show the nightmare part, like I think that would almost play out better.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that you have this story too, that he's this like prolific child serial killer. So like the whole story behind him is that he has murdered like children. And then, you know, obviously the parents like banded together and like burned him to death because he got off on a technicality in court or something like that. And you have this horrific entity with this horrible and horrifying backstory and these really terrifying powers to be able to infiltrate your dreams and then have it, you know, be a reality in the physical world that you die. That's so terrifying. And then in the very next scene, he's doing a Jack Sparrow run. Like, like Freddy Krueger runs like drunk Jack Sparrow.
Yes. And his like floppy arms.
Yes. Even though he has like the gross like makeup and there's a scene where he like cuts his skin and there's maggots inside of him.
Yeah.
There's certainly like a gross factor to him, but that's not scary.
But it's not like terror.
No.
Like it's not like a Michael Myers type thing where you like feel like he's evil. He is evil because of the stuff that he's doing and because like you said, he's infiltrating your dreams.
Right.
But his like temperament isn't evil.
Yeah.
So it's like not, that's the thing I think is like his mannerisms aren't, how he carries himself isn't, how he talks. Maybe he's just drunk. Maybe he's
Freddy's
just a drunk.
Drunk in his boiler room.
It could explain a lot.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Now I think if this movie settled more into the cult classics or like the camp classics, I think it has a better place there. And I feel like just that, again, what we were saying, like the originality of the idea and some of the execution, people probably are, that's why we're putting it into a higher category of like true horror classics. But I mean, Nancy's mom, Marge, or Marg, I forget how they say it. She, I mean, hilarious, but so bad.
Horrible. And also I noticed the acting in general got worse as the movie went on.
Like it started out
okay. Yeah. I felt. And then I guess really towards the end when it is primarily Nancy and her mom, their acting together was not great.
Right.
Like their scenes together, I was like, oh, it's a little cringe.
Yeah, and they really missed a lot of opportunities for, you don't need like a ton of character development.
Sure.
For sure. Like you don't need to go crazy with it, but I feel like we didn't really get a sense of who anybody was.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that I can tell you, really, is that Johnny Depp's character is an athlete and the one guy is in a band.
Yes.
That's it. You don't know that much about Nancy, minus like she has an alcoholic mom and
Right.
like separated parents.
Right.
And none of the teenagers really have like super different personalities. It's just like...
They're all sort of like generic people.
Right. And so I think one of my issues with it is that Nancy herself is our quote unquote final girl, and she doesn't really do anything for me.
No. The only thing she did for me
Uh-huh.
was towards the end when she sets up all the Home Alone traps
Yeah,
for Freddy Krueger.
Yeah.
I was like, is this Home Alone?
It really was a Home Alone
Yeah,
moment.
like the thing she was like the little booby trap she was setting for Freddy Krueger. I was like,
Uh-huh.
oh my God, is this Kevin? Like, I love it because in that moment we saw that she was like a little bit like creative. Like she had some like fight in her, and she was thinking about how she could get him and pull him out into reality. But other than that, she was just a girl,
Yeah.
like who was in high school.
It was almost like her character was her actions, and it wasn't really like anything more than that.
No.
And I also think that they obviously missed an opportunity with Johnny Depp because he was probably one of the more natural actors in the whole
Definitely.
thing. And I feel like his character was just kind of like there.
Yeah.
Like he didn't really do much. He didn't add that much, but also the scenes that he was in, he was a much more natural actor than the
For
rest of
sure. Honestly, I felt like him and Tina, which is the
Tina,
other
yeah.
girl who originally, she dies pretty quickly.
who also looks 35. Tina looks like a whole PTA mom.
Yeah, she maybe was retained a few times. We're not sure. I felt like she was also a pretty good actress. Obviously, we didn't get to see much of her. But what I did see of her, I didn't hate. I thought she was pretty natural.
Yeah. All of the adults were bad.
All of
Every
the adults are bad.
single.
All of the cops.
Which, speaking of adults, you
Oh,
made a good
yeah.
observation.
Yes. So the teacher in this movie, which, by the way, I have to say that scene, I did really like that scene where they're in class and Nancy falls asleep and Tina, that was one of my favorite scenes where Tina's in the body bag and she just like appears next to her.
And then the body bag gets dragged through the halls. Yeah.
That was a
cool
really
scene.
cool scene. That whole thing. Lots of cool shots, just lots of cool fear and terror elements kind of in that. But anyways, the teacher in that scene is the paranormal expert in the Insidious movies. Oh yeah, the medium. Yes, I'm sorry. In the Insidious movies.
Yeah.
Which I love the Insidious.
Which you like recognized her right away. You were just like...
I was like, I know who this person is. Immediately went to IMDb and was like, she's been in a horror movie. Like, I know it.
Which I'm sure, you know, super fans of the Nightmare movies probably like when she was on that, they probably were like, oh my God, like it's her.
Yeah.
But for us, we were like, oh, it's the Insidious lady.
Yeah. It's a medium from Insidious.
Yeah. I'm assuming this was a very quickly shot production.
Yeah, I have a thought. Continue, but I have a thought.
My thought to why it was very quickly shot is not just like a technical thing and like a storytelling thing. It's because Nancy had the same pimple on her forehead the whole movie. And so I was like, wait a second.
Yeah. And they didn't really try to like
They did
hide
not
it.
cover it up. Also, why did they cast a final girl who's a mouth breather?
I don't know.
I can't. I'm not gonna hate on Nancy too much. I'm sorry. I'm like shitting on Nancy right now. I'm sorry, Nancy.
I wanted it to be Tina. I felt like Nancy should have died and Tina should have been the final girl.
I know, but you have to keep in mind that in slasher movies, if you're a hoe, you get killed.
I know. Anyways, I thought about the shortness, the quickness of the production was I felt like the sets looked very cheap.
Yeah.
I felt like there were certain shots even where you could see the sets kind of like see that it was a set. And I thought to myself, the original Halloween looked better than this movie.
Oh, by far.
And it was filmed years before.
Right.
So you can't blame it on technology. You can't blame it on the times.
Right.
I think maybe it was perhaps just a budget issue or just a production design. I don't know.
Yeah. I think it was almost like they went for creativity and flash and kind of forgot to just make like a pretty looking movie, because like horror, most people don't think of horror as like the cinematography category of movies, but I think it is. I think horror for me has always been a masterclass of like framing and lighting and set design, because that is half of what makes it scary. The shots that are so iconic from horror movies are iconic because they're thought through and developed and planned and lit perfectly and
shot perfectly.
And I feel like Wes and his team really wanted to push the limits and try new things, which was great, but in doing that, I think they spent all their time with those really like iconic parts and then like left the rest to just kind of sit.
Yeah, I think they did
dormant.
too. Which I think also kind of contributes to some of the inconsistencies in the movie, you know?
Yeah. What's also inconsistent is that in this movie, you have all of these really innovative shots and these, I mean, they even like try their hand at like special effects that were like ahead of their time, which obviously aren't great. They're dated, but you can still appreciate it.
Sure.
But then like in that same breath, you have them pulling a mannequin through the window at the end, like when it's like Nancy's mom, and it's just a clear stiff mannequin, and it's like they could have killed her in any other way, but they picked that one and they did it in a really cheap, ugly, humorous way, and that's how you're gonna end the movie. It's not a bad movie, and I no longer hate it, and I now appreciate so much of the originality, of the innovation, of the creativity. But in that same breath, 60% of it is creative and wonderful and all of those things I just said, and then the other 40% is just absolute trash.
That's why I said I'm 50-50 about this movie.
Now, I am really curious to revisit the other ones. Again, they lean more into Freddy as kind of like that, like humor villain, and I'm curious to see what I think of the rest of them, especially like as they got bigger budgets and as they were able to expand upon that reality and all that. I do know a piece of trivia about this movie. That it means that there would not have been a franchise. When Wes Craven wrote this movie, the movie ended after Nancy quote unquote kills him. So the scene where she realizes Freddy basically feeds on your fear, and if you don't fear him anymore, he has no power over you, which is very similar to Labyrinth. You know, the movie Labyrinth, where she kind of realizes that she's like, you know, you have no power over me. And that like taking her power back, and that's how she defeats Freddy. The movie originally was just going to end there. And then I don't know if it was like the studio or somebody was just like, well, if you end it there, there's, you know, there's no open ending so that we can possibly move into a franchise, which by this time we were franchising horror. And so I think they saw again this original concept and this very different villain. I will say that even if I'm not a fan of Freddy Krueger, he is very different and he's very distinct and recognizable, and for fans of the movies, I'm sure he was probably their favorite part. But I think it really would have been a much more solid movie if they didn't have that stupid ending. When his sweater is like the cover of the convertible car.
Yes. I was like, oh my God. Like, I like the other way better. And obviously I haven't seen any of the other ones, but I personally don't really care to see any of the other ones. I mean, if they're on, I'll watch it kind of thing, but I'm not going to like go seeking them out. I do have a question for you. Why was Nancy's hair turning gray?
Wait, was it? I did not even notice that. I don't know why I didn't notice that, but I did notice that.
There was like a scene, I think, where they kind of talked about it, or the mom mentioned it, I think. It was like Anna from Frozen, but like not for that reason.
I don't know if maybe they were going with like, she's so exhausted that her hair is turning gray kind of a thing, because she hasn't slept in like 4 days.
Yeah.
But like, obviously your hair doesn't turn gray that fast.
Should I Google this? Maybe there's a reason. Nancy's hair goes from 80s brown waves to sleepy nest of fear-induced salt and pepper realness. Is that actually possible for one's hair to turn white with fright? Literally no, that's not a thing. So basically it sounds like they're just trying to say that like she's
so terrified that her hair goes white.
Growing white. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I don't know why I completely missed that. I just like,
it was subtle. I want to say because, you know, when she's in the hospital and they're monitoring her or whatever, she falls asleep for a little bit and then she sees Freddy and da-da-da. I think when she comes out of that is the first time that we see her hair turning gray. Because I think either the doctor or the mom says something about it in that moment.
Gotcha.
And may not even say anything. The mom might have just like touched it or like been like, your hair, or like something, whatever drunk moms say.
Drunk Marge. Yeah. I don't know. I did not notice that. I think I was too busy looking at Johnny Depp in a crop top.
Who wasn't?
Right?
Yeah. Short circuit because Johnny Depp was in a crop top.
I know. I just lost my composure there.
Yeah. Speaking of losing your composure, I just have one other thing to say about this movie. The scene where the millipede comes out of her mouth. Will haunt me for the rest of my life.
That really bothered you.
It really fucked me up.
So bugs are a trigger.
Bugs are always a trigger.
So I feel like the maggot scene was probably awful.
The maggot scene was awful, but it was just something about the mouth, and it was brown, and like we live in South Carolina, so there's like brown palmetto bugs here, which are these giant cockroach things that fly. Fucking hate. And I think it looked a little too close to a palmetto, but where I was like, ew.
You had some trauma response.
Yeah, I think so. There was a time when I was little and I was sleeping, and literally a palmetto bug landed on my pillow next to my ear.
No.
And it was so loud that it woke me up. Like the sound of him flying and landing.
They are huge.
They're like freaking bats.
I know.
Like,
it's terrifying.
Talk about horror. Like we live in horror.
It's true. Living in South Carolina is living in horror at all times.
It's a nightmare on freaking Elm Street. I'll tell you what.
I have seen some bugs that I cannot explain.
That only exist in nightmares.
Only exist here, and you'll Google them and they don't exist. South Carolina
are the bugs Freddy Krueger?
It's possible.
Dang.
So wrapping it up, what is your popcorn rating for this movie?
I want to give it a medium. Is that what you think I want to give it?
I thought you were going to give it a small, actually. Well, I guess because you're 50-50.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
So like I want to give it a medium.
Yeah.
But I just don't know if I liked it enough to give it a medium. But then I feel like people are going to hate me if I give it a small. Because it seems, I mean, I'm still not over the fact that this has a 95% on Rotten Tomatoes.
I truly do think that it is.
Just because it's like in the genre of it being a classic?
That, and I think that it was pretty like groundbreaking.
Sure. Okay. So I guess like from that aspect, I understand it. But just as a whole, just as a film, I think I'm gonna give it a small.
That's fine.
Okay.
I gave it a small on my first viewing.
And what are you giving it now?
I'm giving it a medium now.
Oh my god. It's like the Grinch. Your heart grew 3 sizes.
Yeah. Well, just one size, but it's okay.
Well, but yeah.
I think for me, I can now appreciate the parts of the movie that I think everybody else loves. Whereas before I was so turned off by everything else that I discredited the rest of it. I am also giving it a medium because watching that did pique my interest in continuing and watching the rest, just to see again, like with technology development and higher budgets and
where it goes.
I want to see where it goes. I want to see what they do with Freddy.
Sure.
I've seen bits and pieces of most of them, but I haven't really done a watch through. So with that being said, it is a medium. I understand why people love it. I just think that 60% of me loved it and 40% of me like hated it. And Wes for sure grew a lot between then and Scream.
He sure did. So. And I'll put it to you like this. I'm happy that I've seen it, so I can say like I've now seen it. Because it is such a classic and because so many people love it.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, at least like no regrets, but
no regrets.
Yeah.
I will say that one hilarious thing is that at one point Caitlin was drifting off, and there was something so ironic about having to keep Caitlin awake to watch A Nightmare on Elm Street.
I mean, to be fair, you have to try and keep me awake to watch any movie.
Literally any movie. Yeah.
But the irony that I was falling asleep during like a movie where if you fall asleep, you get killed.
Yep.
Really was kind of funny.
Classic Caitlin.
Classic Caitlin for sure.
Well, that does it for us. Thank you so much for joining us on this bonus throwback episode. I'm so sad to say that this will be the end of our spooky season month.
Yeah,
where
are you okay?
I am okay.
Do you need to go to counseling?
No.
Okay.
I'll be all right.
Okay.
There is some horror still yet to come out this year, so I'll have some spooky stuff to cling on to.
We always have spooky stuff.
We always have spooky things. I am excited to start moving specifically into like award season and getting into the kind of meat and potato movies. And so our next review is going to be Cate Blanchett's new movie, Tar. I hope I'm saying that correctly. I don't know if it's Tahar or something.
Yeah, I don't know.
Different. There's a accent on the A.
Right.
So we're very excited about that. It's getting some good reviews, and I'm sure she's brilliant as always.
Love her.
So that episode will come out next Friday, and I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend and a very happy Halloween.
And thanks for joining us on the ride home.